Paris to Berlin in 1885 to 1887. After completing his studies in Madrid, Rizal went to Paris and Germany in order to specialize in ophthalmology. He particularly chose this branch of medicine because he wanted to cure his mother's eye ailment, and he served as assistant to the famous oculist of Europe. In Berlin, capital of then unified Germany, he met and befriended several top German scientists: Dr. Fyodor Jagor, Dr. Adolf B. Mayer, Dr. Hans Mayer, and Dr. Rudolf Virchow. His merits as a scientist were recognized by the eminent scientists of Europe.
Shortly after terminating his studies at Central University of Madrid, Rizal went to Paris in order to acquire more knowledge in ophthalmology. He stopped at Barcelona to visit his friend Maximo Viola, a medical student and a member of rich family of San Miguel, Bulacan. He stayed for a week, during which time he befriended Senor Eusebio Corominas, editor of the newspaper La Publicidad, and made a quiet sketch of Don Miguel Moraita, the owner of La Publicidad. November 1885, he was living in Paris. Dr. Louis de Weckert, 1852 to 1906, leading French ophthalmologist, where Rizal worked as an assistant about 4 months. And on January 1, 1886, Rizal wrote a letter for his parents to reveal that he was rapidly improving his knowledge in ophthalmology. Rizal relaxed by visiting his friends, such as the family of the Pardo de Taveras, Trinidad Felix and Paz, Juan Luna, and Felix Resurrection Hidalgo. Juan Luna, the great master of brush, Rizal helped him by posing as model in several paintings. Number 1, Death of Cleopatra, Rizal posed as an Egyptian priest. Number 2, Blood Compact, Rizal posed as Sikatuna.
Rizal as a musician. Rizal had no natural aptitude for music, and this he admitted. He studied music only because many of his schoolmates at Ateneo were taking music lessons. In a letter dated November 27, 1878, he told Enrique Lete that he learned the solfeggio piano and voice culture in 1 month and a half. He was a flutist in various impromptu reunions of Filipinos in Paris. Some of his compositions are Alin Mang Lahi or Any Race, a patriotic song which asserts that any race aspires for freedom, and La Deportacion or Deportation, a sad danza composed in Dapitan during his exile. In historic Heidelberg. In February 1, 1886, Rizal left Quai Paris. In February 3, 1886, he arrived in Heidelberg, a historic city in Germany, famous for its old university and romantic surroundings. Rizal was a good chess player and became a member of Chess Players Club. He became popular among German students because he joined them in their chess games and beer drinking and watched their friendly saber duels. He worked at the University of Heidelberg under the direction of Dr. Otto Becker, a German ophthalmologist.
To the flower of Heidelberg. He was fascinated by the blooming flowers along the cool banks of the Neckar River. The light blue, or forget-me-not, is his favorite flower. On April 22, 1886, he wrote a fine poem a las Flores de Heidelberg, or to the flowers of Heidelberg. With Pastor Ulmir at Wilhelmsfeld, where Rizal spent a 3-month summer vacation. Protestant pastor Dr. Karl Ulmir, where Rizal stayed at the vicarage of their house and who became his good friend and admirer. On May 29, 1887, Rizal wrote from Munich or Mücken, to Friedrich or Fritz.
First letter to Blumentritt. On July 31st, 1886, Rizal wrote his first letter in German to Professor Ferdinand Blumentritt, director of the Ateneo of Leitmeritz, Austria. He had heard of this Austrian ethnologist and his interest in the Philippine language. In his letter, Rizal said, "I have heard that you are studying our language and that you had already published some work about it. Permit me to send you a valuable book written by my countrymen in your language." The Spanish version is mediocre because the author is only a modest writer, but the Tagalog part is good, and it's precisely the language spoken in our province with the latter. Rizal sent a book which he mentioned that book was entitled Arithmetica and was published in two languages, Spanish and Tagalog, by the University of Santo Tomas Press in 1868. The author was Rufino Baltazar Hernandez, a native of Santa Cruz, Laguna. Heidelberg impressed Blumentritt, who reciprocated by sending Rizal a gift of two books. It marked the beginning of their long and frequent correspondence. Also their friendship that lasted all their lives. Blumentritt, the Austrian, became the best friend of Rizal, the Filipino.
Rizal was fortunate to be sojourning in Heidelberg when the famous University of Heidelberg held its 5th centenary celebration on August 6, 1886. It was 3 days before his departure, and he was sad because he had come to love the beautiful city and its hospitable people. On August 9, 1886, 3 days after the 5th centenary celebration of the University of Heidelberg, Rizal left the city and he boarded a train which visited various cities of Germany. On August 14, 1886, he arrived on Leipzig. He attended some lectures at the University on History and Psychology and befriended Professor Friedrich Rizal and Dr. Hans Meyer. In Leipzig, Rizal translated the Schiller William Tell from Germany into Tagalog and also the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. He also corrected some chapters of his second novel and performed his daily physical exercise at the city gymnasium, and he also worked as a proofreader in a publisher firm, thereby earning some money. On October 29, he left Leipzig for Dresden, where he met Dr. Adolf B. Meyer, a director of Anthropological and Ethnological Museum. He stayed 2 days in the city, and he heard Mass in a Catholic church evidently, and this Mass impressed him very much, for he wrote on his diary. In the morning of November 1, Rizal left Dresden by train, reaching Berlin in the evening.
Rizal welcome in Berlin scientific circles. Rizal was enchanted by Berlin because of its scientific atmosphere and the absence of race prejudice. In this city, he came in contact with great scientists. He met for the first time Dr. Theodor Hagor. He is a German scientist, traveler, and author of the Travels in the Philippines, a book in which Rizal read and admired during his student days in Manila. Dr. Hagor, in return, introduced Rizal to Dr. Rudolf Virchow, famous German anthropologist, and the latter's son, Dr. Hans Virchow, professor of descriptive anatomy. Rizal became a member of Anthropological Society, the Ethnological Society, and the Geographical Society of Berlin. Upon recommendation of Dr. Hagor and Dr. Meyer, his membership in the scientific societies proved that his scientific knowledge was recognized by Europe scientists. Dr. Virchow, who recognized Rizal's genius, invited the latter to give a lecture before Ethnographic Society of Berlin in response to Virchow's invitation. Rizal wrote a scholarly paper in German entitled Tagalist for Kunst or Tagalog Metrical Art, which he read before the society in April 18, 1887. This paper published by the society in the same year, and it elicited favorable comments from all scientific quarters.
Rizal's life in Berlin. Rizal was not a mere student or a curious tourist. He lived in his famous capital of unified Germany for a reason. There are 5 reasons why Rizal lived in Germany. First is to gain further knowledge of ophthalmology. Second, to further his studies of science and languages. Third one is to observe the economic and political conditions of German nation. Fourth is to associate with famous German scientists and scholars. Lastly is to publish his novel Noli Me Tangere. By day, he worked as an assistant in the clinic of Dr. Zwiger, an eminent German ophthalmologist. At night, he attended lectures in the University of Berlin. And at his boarding house, he kept himself trim by daily exercise and practiced German, French, and Italian speaking. Madame Lucie Serdol, a French professor. She became Jose's professor in Berlin. He took private lessons in French in order to master the idiomatic intricacies of the French languages.
Rizal on German women. In a letter to his sister Trinidad dated March 11, 1886 from Germany, Rizal praised German women for their serious, diligent, educated, and friendly nature, constructing them with what he perceived as gossipy and materialistic Spanish women. He regretted that Filipino women in the Philippines were more focused on appearance rather than intellect. However, he also commended the delicacy of feeling, fine manners, devotion, and hospitality of Filipino women, especially those in the provinces. Rizal encouraged his sister to prioritize education and avoid indolence, emphasizing the importance of intellectual cultivation to earn respect.
German customs. Christmas costume of the Germans delighted him the most. Another interesting German custom observed by Rizal is self-introduction to strangers in a social gathering. According to the German code of etiquette, it is a bad manner for the guest to remain aloof and wait for his host or hostess to make the proper introduction.
Rizal's darkest winter. Rizal spent winters in many temperate countries. The winter of 1886 in Berlin was his darkest winter. During this bleak winter, he lived in poverty because no money arrived from Calamba and he was flat broke. The diamond ring which his sister Saturnina gave him was in the pawn shop. He could not pay his landlord. He had to scrimp, eating only 1 meal a day, and that daily meal consisted of bread and water or some cheap vegetable soup. His clothes were old and threadbare. He washed them himself because he could not afford to pay the laundry. Out in faraway Calamba, Pasiano tried desperately to raise money. He knew his brother was in a dire financial situation in Berlin, but the crops had failed due to the ravages of the locusts. The sugar market collapsed. Time was of the essence, but poor Pasiano was delayed in raising the necessary funds. Meanwhile, Rizal starved and shivered with wintry cold. His health broke down due to lack of proper nourishment. He began to cough and he feared that he was going to be sick with tuberculosis. Never had he suffered such physical clothes penury, so that his soul cried out in despair. The bleak winter of 1886 was memorable in the life of Rizal for 2 reasons. First, it was a strange city, and second, it brought him great joy after enduring so much sufferings, because his first novel, Noli Me Tangere, came off the press in March 1887. Like the legendary Santa Claus, Dr. Maximo Vayala, his friend from Bulacan, arrived in Berlin at the height of his despondency and loaned him the needed funds to publish the novel.